Hello, YouTube. This is UMills03. In previous lessons, we've introduced the concepts of arithmetic expressions and variables. The idea that we can use Java to figure out what 8 times 2 is, or what the remainder is when we divide 112 by 17. We can also use Java to evaluate expressions whose values could either be true or false. So when you have an arithmetic expression, the output could essentially be any real number under the sun. But when we talk about Boolean expressions and Boolean variables, which will be the subjects of the next 2 lessons, what we'll be looking at is expressions that can only have the result, only have a solution, a value of true or false. So that would be an example, in the statement that 8 plus 4 equals 13. That would be a statement that's either true or false. And we can model those types of statements in Java and figure out different logical operations, because the goal is that we might want the execution of the program, we might want the output to depend on what type of information is true or false about a particular entity or person or someone running the program. So what we're going to do is we'll start with an empty main method. So, we're pretty familiar at this point with looking in our BlueJ project, and we can double click on the class and we can start to write some code in here. So what we're going to do is we're already familiar with printing statements. So I'm going to print what's called a Boolean expression. So I'm going to print a statement that would either be true or false. So I'm going to say, Java, I want you to tell me whether or not it's true or false that 10 plus 35 is equal to 45. And so what we're going to do is we're going to be evaluating this expression for its truth value. It's not necessarily really doing a computation. I'm not asking it to really compute 10 plus 35. I mean, I sort of am. The Java has to do that, but this is not an arithmetic expression. It's a Boolean expression because we're checking for it's either true or false. It doesn't output 45. It doesn't output a sum or a number. It outputs either true or false. So now if we go ahead and run the main method, indeed we see that a Boolean like that, we would expect it to be true. But we could also have a different type of Boolean where maybe the result would be different. So let's have a different example here. So let's say double t equals negative 6.8, system.out.println of t greater than 0. So what this code does here is it's going to return true if t is greater than 0, and false if t is not greater than 0. What if t is equal to 0? So if we go ahead and run this code with t equals negative 6.8, we can see that negative 6.8 is not bigger than 0, so this inequality is false. But if we go ahead and change it maybe to a less than or equal to, so we can talk about the types of signs and the way that we could compare two different things. So remember when we were talking about like variables, like if we say int x equals 12, this is an assignment. So one equals sign means that we basically feed the value 12 into the variable x. Okay, we're saying I want you to keep track of 12. Okay, but if you say x equals 12, this is a check for equality. So this is a statement that returns true if and only if the value of x is truly 12. So that's the difference between an assignment and an equality. So when we have a Boolean expression, if you remember from earlier in the video, we didn't just write 10 plus 35 equals 45. We had 10 plus 35 equals 45. So that checks for equality. And then, of course, we can check for greater than, less than. So x less than 12 is true if and only if x is less than 12. So hopefully that's clear to you, sort of how those expressions work. And then you can also have a greater than or equal to. So what if you said something like x greater than or equal to 22? So you see a greater than sign and an equal to sign. So this would be is true if x is greater than 22 or x is 22. Okay, and it would return false otherwise. So false if x is strictly less than 22. Okay, so hopefully you can understand the difference between less than, greater than or equal to and greater than, right? 6 is not greater than 6, but 6 is greater than or equal to 6. So hopefully you can see the difference there, and you can see sort of how we can use these different, how we can compare two different numbers here. And you can do it with two different variables if you want to. So if you said int x and y, so this is the declaration of two int variables on the same line. So we're pretty familiar with how that works. And we could go ahead and say something like system, and then we could say something like, okay, what about x equals 5, and then y equals x, and then y plus equals 2. So what happens here? So this makes x equal 5, this makes y equal 5, and then this makes y equal 7, because we talked in lesson 4 about this shorthand form of incrementing, or changing the value of a variable by a certain amount. And you can do that with addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. So anyway, what if we said system.out.println of x plus y not equal to 12? So this exclamation point right here means not. So this Boolean expression says x plus y is not equal to 12. So would this return true or false? This would return false, because we do expect 5 plus 7 to be 12. We would be expecting that to be, so this Boolean itself is false because x plus y is 12. So we expect, so remember, so for this one up here, we expect true, because negative 6.8 is less than or equal to 0. And then for the second one, we expect false, because 5 plus 7 is not equal to 12. It is equal to 12. So that's why we have the true and the false there. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And we can do other examples here. So you can also have, strings. And we've seen an example of a Boolean method already. So if you recall from lessons 5 and 6, when we were talking about string methods, recall that if we have something like string w equals water, and we say system.out.println, let's write something like this. So we are familiar with a method of the string class, which we talked about in lesson 5, I believe, and it's called isEmpty. And it simply returns true if the length of a string is 0, and false if the length of a string is greater than 0. So if it has characters in it. So this one has characters in it. So the w.isEmpty would return false. But if you have an exclamation point, this is called a negation. So this would flip the truth value of whatever your Boolean is. This would actually be true, because it is not true that w is empty. So we have the negation to keep track of that. So since it is not an empty string, this overall Boolean would evaluate to true. And we can go ahead and compile that and double check that. So we should have another true Boolean, and that's what you see down here. It's the third thing that runs. So that's kind of the essence of Boolean expressions, and that's what you should be familiar with going forward. So remember, we can have more lines down here. There's something else that we need to talk about in this video, which I don't want to forget to bring up, and that's combining Boolean expressions. So you could also combine two Booleans together, and maybe you want to compare two different things at the same time. So let's do a little example. String A equals apple. Okay, B equals banana. So this is an example of declaring and initializing two string objects on the same line. And we've been saying in previous videos that it's usually okay to declare and initialize variables on the same line as long as they're the same data type. So clearly A and B are both strings, right? They're both basically links or sets of characters. They're just words. So we could say something like system.out.println of a.length mod 2 equals 0 and b.length mod 2 equals 0. So let's kind of study this statement for a second. If you see these two and signs here, that means that we're going to compare two Booleans with an and. In order for an and statement to be true, both of the statements have to be true. So think about a combined statement. Like if you say something like, my dog is blind and the sky is blue. If you make that statement, I have multiple ways to prove you wrong. Either if your dog's not blind, what you said is wrong, or if the sky's not blue, what you said is wrong. So you have to understand that, in order for this entire Boolean expression to evaluate to true, both of these individual Booleans would have to evaluate to true. That's how the and works. So if we say a.length mod 2, so the length of apple is 5, the remainder when 5 is divided by 2 is 1. 1 is not equal to 0, so here we have false and true. And the reason why this other one is true, right? So if we look at banana that has 6 letters, the remainder when you divide 6 by 2 is 0. So the second Boolean was true, but the first one started out as false. So if you have false and true, you get false. But what if we had something a little bit different? What if we said 5 plus 5 equals 10 or 0 is equal to 7,812. So obviously one of these Booleans is false. It's obviously not the case that 0 is equal to 7,812, but it is the case that 5 plus 5 is equal to 10. So if you have a true or false, this would evaluate to true. So if at least one Boolean is true, the or is true. If at least one Boolean is false, the and is false. So hopefully you can internalize that and think about what's going on here, and you can combine them in different ways. And in the next video, we're going to be looking a little bit more at Boolean expressions, but we're going to be putting them into variables because, like we said, we can have variables keep track of arithmetic expressions. Similarly, we can have variables keep track of true and false statements. So play around with the and the or, understand the difference between these two vertical bars and these two ampersand signs. When would a and result in true or false? When would an or result in true or false? When would a not result in true or false? So if you say not true, this results in false, right? If you say not false, this results in true. So you can feed these actual Boolean literals, true and false, into here. And this exclamation point, you need to understand that that's a negation. And what if two wrongs make a right? So what if you say not true? Okay, so if something is not true, then it's true. So we already have a lot of Booleans here that we're printing, but let's just look at the last 5. So for the last 5, we're expecting false, true, false, true, true. So just look at the last 5 Booleans that we're going to print, and we get false, true, true, true. And that's exactly what we expected. So hopefully these kinds of examples are giving you a sense of how to use Boolean expressions and how to sort of chunk them together. You can have any kinds of examples that you want, and it would behoove you to try to go ahead and try out different examples. What about this one? 7 is not equal to 4. Well, that's true. And not 3 equals 10. Well, the 3 equals 10 is false, so the not 3 equals 10 is true. So we have a true Boolean and a true Boolean, so this one should be true. So go ahead and practice that more, and in the next video we'll talk about storing these Boolean expressions into variables and why that might be a useful paradigm as we go forward in our exploration of computer programming. From UMills03, thanks for watching, and please subscribe.